I begin my look at the darker side of the African continent, with a tale from over 100 years ago. It was 1919, and a man by the name of Captain J.E.T. Phillips, who was the British Commissioner for the former Kigezi district of Uganda, at a time when the country was under British rule, embarked on an expedition to the then rarely visited volcanoes of the Virunga Mountains, northwest of Rwanda. According to his journal of the expedition, which would later be included in the Royal Geographical Journal of London, he met with isolated tribes, saw the rare mountain gorillas of Rwanda, and experienced firsthand the religious and cultural customs of the Bachiga tribe of Rwanda. 4 years after the expedition, on Monday, January 29, 1923, he held a lecture for the Royal Geographical Society in London. As part of his lecture, he described what he discovered to be the Bachiga tribe's method of punishment for murder. As the region was under British rule in 1919, the tribe complained bitterly about the European method of punishment. For them, this would mean taking the accused to the High Court, which was 300 miles away. This justice process, in the Bachiga tribe's opinion, was too slow and ineffective if it were to be used as a deterrent against future would-be killers. So they adopted their own swifter method of justice for the crime. J.E.T. Phillips claims to have witnessed this punishment as it was carried out. 2 murderers within the tribe, both men, had taken the lives of family members. One of them killed his stepfather and the other his mother-in-law. Phillips describes the fate of one of these men as he saw it unfold. He was hunted down, taken to the scene of the crime, where he was confronted with the corpse. He was then shut inside the home of the victim along with the body overnight. At daybreak, a deep grave was dug next to the victim's home, and the murderer was stripped of his clothing and belongings. The young men of the tribe were brought forward to witness the punishment, in the hope that it would act as a warning to their future conduct. The murderer was placed inside the grave, face up. The corpse was then placed on top of him and the grave was filled in, leaving the murderer to suffer an unimaginable death. It's written in Phillips' journal that to the Bachiga tribe, this was justified, because in their eyes the victim was exacting revenge on their killer by contributing to his own death. Moulay Hassan, who was named the Ogress of Fez by the press, led a double life like few others. Born in Algiers sometime in the late 19th century, she became an exotic dancer from an early age, and was once considered to be the most beautiful cabaret girl in northern Africa. Between 1907 and 1912, the French military took control of parts of western and northern Morocco. When Moroccan tribes from the Atlas Mountains rebelled in 1912 and crossed the desert to confront the French, Moulay was said to have saved the lives of a number of French officers by hiding them at her nightclub in the northern city of Fez. The exact number of men she is said to have saved is unclear, but reports range from 16 to 30. For this deed, she was recommended for the Legion of Honour and lauded by the French government as a hero. In 1925, she again impressed the French military when she raised the alarm of an imminent attack on the soldiers, an act which she believed saved, quote, 1,000 Frenchmen. The Legion of Honour medal was never bestowed on Moulay because of the nature of her profession. Many people, mostly the wives of French soldiers according to reports, argued that her running of a dance club and the selling of sex was a dishonest living, and would tarnish the Legion of Honour, a commendation so rarely received. When Moulay became impatient with the bestowment, she said that if she did eventually receive the medal, she would tie it to the tail of a mule. For the French military, this was the last straw, and they saw to it that she never received the honour. Later in life, she was considered to be one of, if not the, most evil serial killer Northern Africa had ever seen. But after her 2 heroic deeds, and despite her comments about the Legion of Honour, the law and French government of Morocco looked favourably upon her and allowed her to evade a death sentence. The reported events surrounding the crimes and eventual arrest of Moulay Hassan are varied, unclear and often contradictory. Because so many versions of events were reported at the time and handed down over the years, it's been impossible to completely separate fact from fiction. The most commonly accepted story, as far as I can tell, is as follows. In 1936, two young boys wandered into the garden of Moulet's home, which was located in Meknès, 40 miles southwest of Fez. Some reports say that the children were digging beneath a fig tree when they found human bones. Others say that the tree, having been brought down by high winds, exposed the remains when the surrounding earth was raised, while another scenario states that they found the bones in a basket, covered by a towel. Whatever the case may be, the boys were approached by police when they were seen in the street, trying to piece together the bones. The French authorities in Fez and Meknès had heard stories of murder within the walls of Moulet's Fez dancing club and Meknès home, but previous investigations were either never made or half-heartedly carried out due to her good reputation. She had on many occasions invited soldiers and law enforcement into her dance club, where the men were entertained by a harem of young girls. This, along with the fact that many local people were afraid to speak out for fear of retribution, meant that the stories surrounding Moulet were never taken seriously. But as these remains were found within the grounds of her home, she was quickly approached and questioned. Moulet, along with her servant, some reports say husband, Ben Ali Mohammed, claimed to have no knowledge of the bones. After a stern reminder from Moulet that she was a saviour of the French people, the officers were about to leave, when they heard scratching noises coming from behind a wall. Moulet and Ben told the officers to pay no attention. They said a cat had been trapped in the wall's recess after some repairs had been carried out a few days ago, but they had made arrangements for it to be freed the next day. Not convinced, the officer struck the wall with the butt of his gun, making a small hole. He shouted out, and a weak voice was heard saying, "No, I will not keep quiet, help. There are 4 of us in here and we are dying." 4 people were pulled from the wall's recess, a young boy and 3 young women. All of them bore the scars of torture and were severely emaciated. According to one police officer, had they stayed in there for 1 more day, they would have died. They begged for water, refusing it from the now furious Moulet, believing that even after being caught red-handed, she would still try to poison them. The police officer fetched them water and arrested the now shamed Moulet. In rebuttal to her arrest, she screamed, "France owes me 1,000 lives." But the celebrated deeds of her former life now meant very little. She, along with Ben Ali Mohammed, were marched from their home, amidst an angry crowd of onlookers, who had by now caught wind of the police presence at their home. It was a violent scene. The people of Fez and Meknès, once afraid to speak out against her, were now trying to attack the prisoners, clawing at their clothes and snatching the jewels from Moulet. Reportedly, for weeks afterwards, precious stones and gold claimed to have been torn from the neck of the evil Moulay Hassan were being sold in the marketplaces. After 24 hours in hospital, the 4 prisoners gave a damning testimony. They told how Moulet had taken them in to work at the Fez nightclub, teaching them to dance or to serve customers. That was until one evening when they were brought to the house by Ben Ali Mohammed. There they were beaten, tied up, boarded up behind a wall and enslaved. There was another girl, they said, who had been a dancer at the club. She too was taken to the home and kept as a slave. One evening she was struck over the head, tortured and killed. They said that they had seen it happen through a spy hole they had cut in the wall. According to them, Moulet had ordered Ben at gunpoint to garrote the woman before she was cut up. Her body parts were then boiled, the flesh was seasoned with spices and catnip, and fed to Moulet's cats. What was left was buried in the grounds of the home. That girl was known as Sharifa. She too had worked at the dance club. She often danced naked with a tray holding goblets of hot tea placed over her head, trying not to spill the scalding hot liquid on her skin. One night they said a customer tried to burn Sharifa with hot needles. Having now been pushed to her physical limits, Sharifa punched and kicked the man in the face. Her fight was short-lived though, and she was taken to Moulet's house in Meknès, where the murder was witnessed. After her arrest, the spell of fear was broken, and many people came forward to testify against Moulet with stories of missing girls who had once worked for her, and dead bodies who had been found, but were never reported out of fear of retribution. It unsurprisingly came to light that she had many slaves at her disposal, all working for her in some capacity, either at her home or at the dance club. Those who resisted said they were shackled, whipped and burned with hot irons. If any girls remained defiant, they were dismembered, their body parts smuggled out of the city and buried in the surrounding sands. As many as 100 girls, according to evidence given by survivors, chose death over Moulay's constant demands. Moulay Hassan appeared in court dressed in white robes when the trial opened in Fez in November of 1938. Judge M. Julin said, "Of the 14 girls known to have been inmates of this club in the past year, 3 have disappeared, 4 are dead, and 7 have been tortured so badly that they will be invalids for life. Once a girl entered this haunt, she was never seen again outside." There are some online reports stating that Moulay Hassan was sentenced to death by guillotine, and Ben Ali Mohammed as an accomplice was sentenced to 10 years. According to this version of events, the sentencing was publicly confirmed by the police, and the date for execution was eagerly anticipated by a relieved community. But as time passed and the public uproar died down, no more news came. According to this scenario, Moulay was seen alive and well in a Fez prison some weeks later, where it was confirmed she was serving a 15-year prison sentence. According to French law enforcement, the death sentence was made in error, although it's widely believed that her once good reputation, tendency to entertain men of high social standing, and the occasions in which she served as a spy to the French government is what led to her death sentence being reprieved in secret. However, I could not find any reliable articles that stated the death sentence was ever given or reprieved. The only reports I found were of the 15-year sentence which was handed down to Moulay after her court appearance in November of 1938, when she was said to be 48 years old. She had been given many monikers over the years: the Nightingale of Fez, the Ogress of Fez, the Witch. But another that was given to her when her trial was over was the female Landru of Morocco, in reference to Henri Désiré Landru, who murdered 11 people in France between 1915 and 1919. A 2001 edition of A Rough Guide to Kenya described Lake Chala on the Tanzanian border as a pleasant place to swim. So when 18-year-old conservation volunteer Amy Nichols took to its waters in March of 2002, along with 3 others who were on a trip organised by Africa and Asia Venture, a British-based gap year company, as far as they were concerned, they had nothing to fear. Hotel staff at the Tsavo West National Park in Kenya, close to where they were camping, also assured them the volcanic lake was safe and crocodile-free, at least the Kenyan side. The group approached the water just before dark. There was a single sign which simply read, "Swim at your own risk." Undeterred, Amy was the first of the group to enter the water. She swam out into the lake, and at about 5 to 10 metres according to her friends, she turned to face the shore, then let out a scream and was pulled beneath the surface. Moments later she re-emerged a few more metres out and screamed, "It's got my legs, get out," before being pulled under again. After nearly 4 hours of trying to find their friend, Andrew Pearce, Elspeth Harley and Eleanor Lancaster headed up the steep side of the volcano towards the nearest police post. On the way they met the Safari Lodge's owner. After hearing about what had happened, she told them that the lake was home to pythons and crocodiles. By the time the weekend had ended, Amy's father had arrived in Kenya, having travelled from the family home in Barnet. Admitting that there was little hope of her being alive, he said he just wanted to be close to her, whatever happened. On the morning of Monday, March 11th, her corpse, which was missing the right arm and had suffered severe lacerations, was found by a local fisherman after it was caught in his net. The inquest into her death was held at the Hornsey Coroner's Court in North London. 19-year-old Andrew Pearce, who was among those in the water, told how he had accompanied Miss Nichols and her 2 friends to the water's edge after setting up camp. It happened very quickly. 2 of the girls got out of the water. I went in to see if I could find her. I found her sandals floating on the water. Obviously devastated, Amy's father, Alan Nichols, had to identify her body before she was flown to Nairobi to undergo a post-mortem examination. Elspeth Harley and Eleanor Lancaster held hands and wept in the court as the evidence was given. Pathologist Dr. Ashley Fagan Earle told the court Amy's right arm had been ripped off at the shoulder, and her body had tooth marks and lacerations consistent with a crocodile attack. He gave the cause of death as drowning, associated with an attack by a crocodile. The Wildlife Service called it a freak accident because there were no crocodiles in the clear blue waters of Lake Chala. The opinion of the local Kenyan police force couldn't have been more contradictory, saying that it was known to be infested despite its safe reputation. Originally cited as being an attack by a dwarf crocodile, which is more typically found in the western regions of Africa, it was later stated in the press that the much bigger Kenyan Nile crocodile was far more likely responsible. Amy Nichols, who had been in Kenya since February of 2002, was due to study geography and sociology at Edinburgh University when her gap year was over. Her next planned stop was Zimbabwe, en route to South Africa. Money donated at Amy's memorial service, held on what would have been her 19th birthday in April, went towards building the Amy Nichols Memorial Centre in the Bunguli village, Kenya, where she was working. The centre is still running today. The events that befell Amy in March of 2002 echoed in many ways the fate of an 18-year-old Scottish girl in May of 1996. Laura Campbell Preston, who was teaching English in a Tanzanian school as part of a 6-month charity work placement before heading to university later that year, was swimming in a well-known and often used waterhole in Moshi, at the foot of Mount Kilimanjaro. There, a group of friends watched in horror as she was attacked and dragged beneath the water by a crocodile and drowned. Her body was later retrieved by a local search party. Laura's funeral took place on May 10, 1996, at St Conan's Kirk, Loch Awe, in western Scotland. She was laid to rest in her hometown of Taynuilt, in a coffin made by the people of Moshi, Tanzania. Born in 1941, Eugene Terre'Blanche was a founder and long-time leader of the Afrikaner Resistance Movement, or AWB. Formed in 1973, the party aggressively opposed the collapse of apartheid in South Africa. One of the most aggressive figures in South African politics, Terre'Blanche believed firmly in white supremacy and the separation of races. For many people, Terre'Blanche's regime was first brought to attention on the release of filmmaker Nick Broomfield's 1991 documentary, The Leader, His Driver and the Driver's Wife. Following the controversial documentary, Eugene Terre'Blanche became the subject of ridicule, which led to Broomfield receiving death threats from the AWB. In June of 1997, Terre'Blanche was sentenced to 6 years in prison for the assault of a petrol station worker and the attempted murder of an employee. During his time in prison, where he was one of only 3 white men, he became a born-again Christian, before being released in 2004. From that time, he had lived in relative obscurity until 2008, when the AWB party's popularity saw a resurgence. Terre'Blanche, steadfast in his beliefs, still wanted to save the South African people from the oppression of the Black National Congress, or ANC government. Terre'Blanche was loved and hated in equal measure, and his life and career is a story of a political struggle that spanned almost 4 decades. On the morning of April 3, 2010, in the town of Ventersdorp, 80 miles west of Johannesburg, 21-year-old Chris Malangu and 15-year-old Patrick Ndlovu, both farm workers and employees of Terre'Blanche, broke into his farmhouse while he slept. The 69-year-old Terre'Blanche, asleep in his bedroom, was set upon and viciously attacked with a steel pipe around the head and chest, leaving him unrecognisable. His body was found with his underwear pulled down. This was first thought to be a final insult, an act of humiliation in death. He was also found with a panga, a kind of machete, next to his body. According to the post-mortem, the panga was never used in the attack, but Terre'Blanche had sustained 28 injuries during the ordeal. Chris Malangu and Patrick Ndlovu were apprehended shortly afterwards. It's unclear exactly how, but some South African news outlets state that the younger of the two, Patrick Ndlovu, made a call to the police telling them what had happened. The hearings began in October of 2011, but during their eventual trials 2 years later, both men pleaded not guilty to the murder charge. Originally thought to be racially motivated, the death of Terre'Blanche was, according to his assailants, the result of a pay dispute, as well as poor treatment, bad working conditions, and the general abuse they had suffered at the hands of the former AWB leader. Patrick Ndlovu, tried as a minor because he was 15 at the time of the incident, was cleared of the murder charge, but was charged with housebreaking with intent to steal. This, along with the fact that most of the evidence against the teenager was inadmissible in court because the police failed to follow South Africa's child protection law in handling the case, meant that he received a 2-year suspended sentence. Chris Malangu told television cameras that not only was he going to walk free, but he was still confident that he would be paid the money owed to him by Terre'Blanche. He was found guilty of murder, and prior to his sentencing, Malangu's supporters gathered outside the courthouse in Ventersdorp. To them he was a hero, while members of the AWB protested against the violence faced by white farmers in South Africa. Reportedly, around 3,000 white farmers had been killed in South Africa since the end of the apartheid era in the early 90s, in bids to take and redistribute their land. Many black South Africans argued that this was nothing compared to the violence faced by them at the hands of the Afrikaners and the AWB, since racial segregation was introduced in South Africa in 1948. This led to violent scenes outside the courthouse between the opposing sides. Malangu insisted on his innocence throughout the trial, and not only claimed that the attack was in self-defence, but that Terre'Blanche had raped him, infecting him with the HIV virus. When Judge John Horn asked why he hadn't mentioned this before, as the trial had almost come to an end, Malangu replied that it was an intimate and personal matter, and not one that he was willing to discuss until now. Despite there being reports that semen was found at the scene, the substance was never analysed, and Malangu's claim was rejected. He was handed a life sentence. In death, Eugene Terre'Blanche's beliefs and philosophy have continued to be influential among white supremacists in South Africa and around the world. A month after Terre'Blanche's death, 55-year-old Stein van Rooyen was appointed new leader of the AWB party. He had previously acted as leader of the party when Terre'Blanche was in prison. Now we come to Zimbabwe, more specifically the town of Gutu in the Masvingo province, which is 140 miles south of the country's capital, Harare. It was here in 2018 that a 46-year-old man carried out a sinister act, an act that he claimed was his father's dying wish. In September of 2018, Paul Suva visited his father's grave. As he approached it, he realised that it had been completely dug out, and there was no sign of his father's remains. He rushed to his elder brother's house to tell him the news. When he arrived, Moses Suva calmly informed Paul that he had dug up their father's remains, and that he was keeping them in his house. Paul Suva informed the police, and on their arrival they found the 28-year-old skeletal remains under Moses Suva's bed. Moses Suva was arrested and appeared in court on September 21st, charged with desecrating a grave. There he explained his actions to the court. Before Horovi Mafuva had passed away in 1990, according to Moses, his last wish was to be exhumed and kept for, quote, historical reasons. When questioned by the police, Moses told them that he had gone to his father's gravesite at 10 a.m. on September 13, 2018, and carried out his father's last wish, but added that he planned to reinter them at a later date. I was fulfilling our agreement. He asked me to take his skeleton and stay with it in my bedroom when he died, he said. Later contradicting this statement, he told the court that he did it simply because he wanted to be close to his father, so he raised him from the dead. Judge Victor Mohammadi ordered that Paul Suva be remanded in custody until October 2nd, during which time a mental examination be carried out. I could find no more information on this case.